There is a version of your life running right now that you would not recognize if you saw it clearly. And the reason you cannot see it is that it has been built one small surrender at a time. Not one big collapse, 1,000 tiny ones, the comment you let slide because arguing felt like too much, the phone call you took at 10 at night because saying no felt worse than being tired the next morning, the job you have been figuring out for 6 years. None of these things individually broke you. That is exactly why they worked. A wolf at the door gets fought. A slow leak in the tire gets ignored until you are stranded on the highway wondering how you ended up there. Most adults are not living lives that were destroyed in a single moment. They are living lives that were quietly drained, one tolerated thing at a time. And they didn't notice because each individual toleration was too small to justify the fight. Here at Master Your Life, we spend a lot of time talking about ambition, about goals, about building something. But there is a category of work that comes before all of that, and almost nobody talks about it directly. It is not the work of adding something new to your life. It is the work of refusing to keep carrying what should never have been allowed in the first place. You cannot build a stronger life on a foundation riddled with tolerated cracks. The cracks have to be named before they can be sealed. Think about your own week for a second. Somewhere in it, there was a moment where somebody spoke to you in a tone you would never accept from a stranger, and you let it pass because they are family, or because it was just a joke, or because confronting it felt like more trouble than it was worth. Somewhere in it, there was a conversation where you started to say something and got talked over, and instead of finishing your point, you just let it go and quietly shrank a little. Somewhere in it, there was a request from somebody who only ever seems to need something from you, never gives. And you said yes anyway because saying no to them has never once felt like an option. You were allowed to take. None of that registered as a crisis. That is the trap. It was never designed to register as a crisis. It was designed to feel normal, and normal is exactly what makes it dangerous, because you cannot fight what you have convinced yourself is just the way things are. Jim Rohn used to say that the things you tolerate today, you will tolerate tomorrow, and the things you refuse today, you will find it easier to refuse tomorrow. What he was pointing at is a compounding effect that runs quietly underneath every single day of your life. A toleration is not a one-time cost. It is a recurring one. It charges you again every single time it happens, and it happens far more often than you think, because you have made it possible by not addressing it the first time. 10 years of a comment tolerated once a month is not 12 incidents. It is the person learning with absolute certainty that this is a door that is always open, and doors that stay open get walked through more, not less. So today we are going to walk through 7 specific things that huge numbers of otherwise capable, intelligent, hardworking adults are tolerating right now without even fully realizing the size of what it is costing them. This is not about becoming difficult or bitter or cutting people off left and right. It is about understanding that there is a direct, measurable line between what you tolerate and the shape your life takes, and that most people are living lives shaped almost entirely by things they never actually chose, just things they never got around to refusing. If even one of these 7 lands on something in your life right now, I want you to notice it, because that noticing is the entire beginning of the work. If you're sitting there already feeling a specific face or a specific situation come to mind, that's not a coincidence, and I want you to do something for me. Drop it in the comments below, even just a word or two, because I read every single comment on this channel, and I want to know which one of these 7 is the one that's been quietly running your life without your permission. You are not alone in this, and naming it out loud, even to strangers in a comment section, is the first small act of refusal. But before we get into the 7, There is something you need to understand about what tolerating actually costs, because the price is not what you think it is. And once you see the real math, you will never look at a small toleration the same way again. Let's talk about the real arithmetic of tolerating something, because almost nobody does this math correctly, and the miscalculation is exactly what keeps people stuck for decades. When you tolerate something small, your brain files it under not a big deal, and on any single day, that filing is technically accurate. The rude comment at Sunday dinner really didn't ruin your Sunday. The friend who called only to ask for a favor really didn't cost you that much time. The extra 20 minutes the toxic meeting on Monday morning eats out of your week really isn't, in isolation, a big deal. Every single toleration, examined in isolation, looks survivable. That is precisely the mechanism by which they survive. Nobody would agree in one sitting to give up a decade of their life to a bad job or a disrespectful relationship. But almost everybody agrees, one Tuesday at a time, to just this once, and just this once, repeated for 10 years, is indistinguishable from having agreed to the whole decade. Here is the part most people miss entirely. Tolerating something doesn't just cost you the immediate discomfort. It teaches everyone and everything around you a lesson, and the lesson sticks. When you swallow a disrespectful comment instead of naming it, you are not neutral in that moment. You are actively confirming to the person who said it and to your own nervous system that this is an acceptable way for you to be treated. The next comment lands a little easier for them to say and a little easier for you to accept, because the precedent is already set. This is how a single tolerated moment in your 20s becomes an entrenched, comfortable pattern by your 40s. Nobody sat down and designed it that way. It simply compounded silently, the way interest compounds on a debt you forgot you were carrying. Consider how this actually plays out for somebody in their late 40s who has been tolerating a handful of these things since their 20s. The relative who has been permitted to make the same cutting joke at every holiday gathering for 2 decades does not experience any friction saying it for the 21st time. It has become part of the family script. The friend who calls only when she needs a favor has built an entire pattern of contact around your availability, and she is not being cruel when she calls again. She has simply never encountered a version of you that says anything other than yes. The job that has been quietly wrong for 8 years does not confront you with a single dramatic moment that forces a decision. It simply continues, Monday after Monday, and each individual Monday is bearable enough that quitting never feels urgent, even while the sum of all those Mondays has slowly reshaped your health, your mood at home, and your sense of what you're capable of. This is the piece that Jim Rohn understood better than almost anyone. It is never the big dramatic event that determines the shape of a life. It's the compounding of small decisions, repeated with such consistency that they stop looking like decisions at all and start looking like simply who you are and what your life is. Discipline compounds into freedom. Tolerance of the wrong things compounds into a kind of quiet captivity. Neither one announces itself loudly on any single day. Both of them are unmistakable after 10 years. And here's the twist that catches most people off guard when they finally see it clearly. The things you are tolerating right now are not neutral background noise sitting quietly in your life, waiting to be ignored forever. They are actively training the people and systems around you every single day to expect more of the exact same thing from you going forward. Toleration is not a passive state. It is an ongoing instruction you are giving, whether you mean to or not, to everyone paying attention to how you respond. That instruction is being received and acted on right now, whether or not you've ever consciously thought about it in those terms. Something even more important is coming, though, because understanding the math of tolerating something is only half of what you need. The other half is understanding exactly what it costs you personally, in your own body and your own mind, when you let that math run for years without interrupting it. And that part is where this gets genuinely uncomfortable to hear. Here's where we get specific, because understanding the pattern in the abstract doesn't change anything. Change requires naming the exact thing in your own life that you've been letting slide. So let's start walking through the 7, one at a time. And I want you to be honest with yourself as we go, because the honesty is the whole point. The first thing you need to stop tolerating is disrespect from people who claim to love you. This is one of the most confusing categories, because it comes wrapped in language that makes it look harmless. It arrives as the joke that always seems to land at your expense, at every family gathering. It arrives as the partner who corrects you in front of other people in a tone they would never use if a stranger were watching. It arrives as the parent who still, well into your adult life, speaks to you the way they did when you were 12, and expects you to absorb it the same way. The confusing part is that these people, if confronted directly, will almost certainly insist that they love you. And in some genuine sense, they might even believe it. But love and disrespect are not opposites that cancel each other out, just because they show up in the same relationship. A person can love you and still be allowed, by your own silence, to speak to you in ways that chip away at you every single time it happens. The love does not neutralize the damage. It just makes the damage harder to name, because naming it feels like an accusation against someone you're supposed to only have warm feelings for. The fix here isn't dramatic. It isn't cutting people off or delivering ultimatums. It's simply refusing to let the moment pass in silence the next time it happens. A calm, clear sentence delivered without anger does more work than people expect. Something as simple as telling someone in the moment that what they just said landed badly and you'd like them to say it differently. You will find that people fall into two categories when you do this. Some of them genuinely did not realize the weight of what they were saying, and the moment you name it, something shifts, sometimes immediately. Those are the relationships worth investing in further, because they were built on more than your silence. Others will get defensive, minimize what you said, or insist you're overreacting to something they consider completely normal. That reaction is not a reason to back down. It is information. It tells you the relationship, as it currently exists, was depending on your willingness to absorb something you shouldn't have to absorb, and that dependency is exactly what needs to end. The second thing to refuse is being talked over and interrupted. And I want you to notice how invisible this one is, because most people who experience it constantly have never once framed it as something happening to them. It just feels like the natural order of conversations, where the loudest or fastest voice wins, and everyone else adjusts around it. But every single time you're cut off mid-sentence, and you simply let the interruption stand, something small but real is lost. Your idea doesn't get finished. The room doesn't hear the version of the thought you actually had. And your own mind quietly logs the experience again, that what you were about to say mattered less than whoever spoke over you. Do that enough times across enough years, and you end up with adults who have trained themselves to speak less, contribute less, and assume their own thinking carries less weight than the people around them who never developed the habit of waiting. The correction is almost embarrassingly simple in practice, even though it feels difficult the first several times you do it. A short, calm phrase that holds your place in the conversation, telling someone directly that you weren't finished, or that you'd like to complete the thought you were in the middle of. The first time you do this in a group that has never seen you do it, there will be a small beat of surprise, maybe even a little tension in the room. That discomfort is not a sign you did something wrong. It's a sign that the room is recalibrating around a version of you it hasn't met before. By the third or fourth time, the specific people who used to interrupt you without thinking start doing it less, because some part of them has registered that it no longer goes unchallenged. And something interesting tends to happen after that. Other quieter people in the room who had been absorbing the same dynamic you had start to hold their own space a little more too once they've watched somebody else do it first. That was only the second of the 7, and honestly, it might not even be the one that's going to hit you the hardest. The one that follows next is the one that tends to catch people off guard, because it's disguised so well as something warm and positive that most people never think to question it at all. The third thing to refuse is the one-way relationship dressed up as a friendship. And this one deserves real attention because it is one of the most emotionally disguised patterns on this entire list. These relationships don't announce themselves as extractive. They look, from the outside, exactly like ordinary friendships or family closeness. There's regular contact, there's friendly language, there might even be real affection somewhere underneath it. But if you actually trace the shape of the contact over months and years, a pattern emerges that's impossible to unsee once you notice it. The relationship activates almost exclusively when the other person needs something and goes quiet the rest of the time. The friend who calls to vent for 45 minutes and then disappears for 2 months until the next crisis arrives. The relative who reaches out mainly when money or a favor is involved. The colleague whose messages only ever contain a request, never a question about how you're actually doing. Here's the truth about relationships like that. Reciprocity isn't an optional extra feature of friendship, it's the actual definition of it. A connection where the interest, energy, and care flow almost entirely in one direction isn't a diminished friendship. It's something else wearing a friendship's clothing. And the reason these relationships persist for so long is that ending them feels disproportionately dramatic compared to what's actually happening, which is just a slow, steady one-sided withdrawal from your time and energy that never gets deposited back. The fix isn't to cut these people off in anger. It's to test the relationship honestly, out loud, the next time the pattern shows up. Something as direct as telling the person that you're happy to help, but that you've noticed the two of you mostly only talk when they need something, and that you genuinely like more contact that isn't tied to a request. This single sentence does something remarkable. It takes an invisible pattern and makes it visible to both people at once. Some people, confronted with this, will get uncomfortable and simply fade away. And that reaction tells you everything you needed to know about what the relationship actually was. Others will genuinely hear it, feel a little embarrassed, and start showing up differently, checking in without an agenda, asking questions they never used to ask. Those are the relationships that had real potential the whole time. And naming the pattern is what finally let that potential surface. If this is landing for you right now, if there's already a specific name sitting in your mind as you hear this, that's worth sitting with. And if any part of what we've covered so far has actually been useful to you, this is the moment to do something small but meaningful. Share this video with somebody in your life who needs to hear it just as much as you did, because chances are there's somebody you care about who is carrying one of these exact same patterns right now without a name for it yet. Now we're going to shift into something a little different, because the fourth toleration on this list isn't about another person at all. It's about an environment, and it might be the single most expensive toleration of the 7, because unlike a comment or a phone call, this one eats an entire third of your waking life, 5 days a week, for however many years you let it continue. The fourth thing to refuse is a work environment that is systematically draining you. Not a hard day here and there, not a difficult season every job goes through, but a sustained, ongoing arrangement where the culture, the manager, or the role itself, is quietly extracting more from you than it gives back year after year. I knew a man some years ago who had, by every visible measure, a good job. Decent pay, an established company, a title people recognized when he mentioned it. He had also been, by his own admission, unhappy in it for the better part of a decade. The management was poor, the culture had gone stale, and the role had drifted so far from what actually suited him that he came home every single evening with nothing left over for the rest of his life. His health had started slipping. His patience at home had thinned. And every time the subject of leaving came up, there was always a perfectly reasonable reason not to. The market wasn't right, the mortgage was real, the timing never quite lined up. A friend of his asked him one question one evening that changed everything, not because it was clever, but because it was simple. The friend asked what advice he would give his own son if his son described the exact same situation to him. He sat with that question for a long moment, and the answer arrived instantly and without hesitation. He would tell his son to leave immediately, and that no salary was worth what the job was doing. To him, the advice he would have given without a second thought to someone he loved was advice he had been refusing to give himself for years. He left within 2 weeks. There was no perfect plan, just a small cushion of savings and a decision he'd been avoiding for far too long. Within 6 months, his sleep had improved, his health had turned around, and the people at home had their evenings back with him. He told me later that leaving had been hard for 2 weeks, and staying had been hard for 10 years, and there was no contest between the two once he saw it that clearly. That question is worth asking yourself right now, honestly, without flinching. Would you tell somebody you love to stay in the exact situation you're currently in? If the answer that comes back is no, then the reasons you've been giving yourself for staying are not really reasons. They're excuses wearing the costume of practicality, and the sooner you see them for what they are, the sooner you can start building your way toward the exit. The fifth thing to refuse might be the most personal one on this entire list, because it isn't about anyone else at all. It's about the voice running inside your own head. Most adults are carrying an internal narrator that speaks to them with a level of cruelty they would never tolerate from another human being. It calls you stupid the moment you make a mistake. It recites your failures back to you in vivid detail the instant you attempt something new. It has usually been running since adolescence, so long ago that most people stop recognizing it as a separate voice at all, and start experiencing it simply as the truth about who they are. Here's what's actually true about that voice. It isn't your conscience, and it isn't an accurate assessment of your worth. It's a pattern of speech that got installed a long time ago, often in response to circumstances and people who are no longer even part of your life, and it has simply kept running on autopilot ever since, mistaking repetition for accuracy. The voice sounds authoritative because it's familiar, not because it's correct. You have been assuming, for years, that if a thought arrives in your own head, in your own internal voice, it must be telling you something true. That assumption is the entire trap, and it's worth questioning directly. The fix doesn't require you to win an argument against that voice, because you can't argue your way out of a decades-old pattern in a single sitting. It requires something smaller and more sustainable, simply refusing to accept what it says as fact every time it speaks. When it tells you that you're stupid for a mistake, you don't need to fight it. You just quietly note to yourself that you made an error, but that doesn't make you stupid, and you let the voice keep talking without agreeing with it anymore. Over months of doing this consistently, something remarkable happens. The voice doesn't necessarily disappear, but it loses its authority. It becomes background noise you've stopped taking seriously, the way you stop hearing a fan running in another room after enough time has passed. What was occupying that mental space, the ongoing hum of self, criticism, becomes available again for actual thinking, actual creativity, actual presence in your own life. The sixth thing to refuse is the living situation you have been telling yourself you'll fix later, for years now, without ever actually setting a date. The apartment that stopped fitting who you are, the city you outgrew a while ago, the arrangement at home that everyone agrees needs to change eventually, except eventually never seems to arrive. This pattern is especially insidious because every individual reason for delay sounds completely reasonable in isolation. The lease isn't up yet. The market isn't quite right. The timing needs to be better. Looked at one at a time, none of these reasons look unreasonable at all. Looked at across 5 or 10 years, a different picture emerges. The reasons keep changing shape, but the underlying situation never actually moves. Here's the truth that's easy to avoid facing directly. The "for now" situation you keep saying you'll fix later is not a placeholder. It is your actual life happening in real time while you wait for permission to change it. The future version where everything gets fixed is not something you're currently living in. It's a story you tell yourself to make the current toleration feel temporary, even when it has quietly become permanent in every way that matters. The fix is uncomfortable in its simplicity. Pick a specific date, no more than 6 months out, by which the situation will be genuinely different, and then work backward from that date to figure out what has to happen along the way. A deadline forces decisions that vague good intentions never will. Without one, the situation persists indefinitely, exactly as it has been persisting. With one, the months ahead of you get filled with concrete action instead of the same postponed hope you've been carrying for years. People who finally do this almost universally report the same thing afterward. The fear of making the change turned out to be far larger than the actual difficulty of doing it, and the years of delay produced nothing except more years of the same toleration. Something even more important than any of these 6 is coming next, because the 7th and final toleration on this list isn't really about any single person, job, or situation at all. It runs underneath every one of the other 6. And once you see it clearly, you'll understand why the previous 6 were even possible to sustain for as long as they were. The 7th thing to refuse is the slow erosion of your own standards, worn down gradually by years of exhausted compromise. This is the deepest one on the list, and it's the hardest to catch, because it isn't tied to a specific person you can point to, or a specific decision you can date. It's the accumulation of 1,000 small moments where fatigue or convenience won out over the standard you used to hold, and each individual surrender felt entirely reasonable at the time. The exercise routine that quietly stopped, the discipline around your work that used to be sharper, the boundaries you once held firmly that you no longer even remember consciously deciding to loosen. None of it happened in one dramatic moment. It happened the way erosion always happens, invisibly, day to day, and undeniably, decade to decade. Here's the truth about that erosion. You don't notice yourself becoming less disciplined or less assertive or less like yourself in the moment it's happening. You notice it later, sometimes years later, when you catch a glimpse of who you used to be and realize you can't quite pinpoint when the distance between that version of you and the current one opened up. It opened up in 1,000 small moments where tired one, or convenient one, and you told yourself it didn't matter just this once. It never mattered just once. It mattered every single time, and the sum of all those times is the life you're currently living. The fix here is not to try to fix everything at once, because that approach collapses under its own weight within a week. It's to pick one eroded standard, just one, and rebuild it deliberately back to where it used to be, or higher than it's ever been. Maybe it's the way you move your body. Maybe it's the quality you bring to your work. Maybe it's the boundary you used to hold with a specific person that quietly disappeared somewhere along the way. Whatever it is, you raise it back up, and you refuse, going forward, to let it